pass through the waters, I will be with you.
Hi, I'm Sherry. Thanks for watching. I wanted to just take a minute and tell you a little bit about this project. A few years ago, I was reading through Exodus, and a few things struck me that I had not thought about before. I knew that there were two artists mentioned, Bezalel and Aholiab, and they were mentioned in the context of being filled with the Holy Spirit to do the work that was required for the tabernacle. So that was pretty amazing to me when I first came across it, especially because it's the first mention of the Holy Spirit in the scriptures filling anyone. But I hadn't realized that fully a quarter of the book of Exodus is dedicated to the description of the aesthetics for the tabernacle. That was really struck me this time. 10 chapters of the 40 chapters in Exodus describe what the tabernacle should look like. It meant to me that the aesthetics must be very important to God. The second thing that struck me was the idea of Moses having to stop and look and pay attention to the burning bush. The scripture says in Exodus 3, "Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not being consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burning up. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses, and he said, Here I am." To me, that meant Moses chose to stop and look at the burning bush, and in so doing, God recognized his consideration of what was set before him. It made me think about how often we go through life and we don't take the time to stop and look and really contemplate the things we can see with our own eyes. The third thing that struck me was exactly what the calf represented. I knew that it was an idol, and I knew that people had created it to fill the need within themselves, to reassure themselves, maybe to meet that need within all of us, to worship something. But I was thinking about how significant the aesthetic was in the creation of the tabernacle, and so I thought about the calf in a new way too. It wasn't only that this was something created in the place of what they would serve and honor and worship as their God, but even more importantly, it was a corruption of the calling of the creative expression. God had given Moses a design to convey to the artists, and he'd filled the artists with the Holy Spirit for creating the place where they would meet with God. But before they had the instructions, the people distorted the gifting by doing something that was not God's intention. They met a need within their community to venerate something, but they created something false and counterfeit instead of the art that God had called them to. That made me wonder about the way we distort our gifts today, or the way that things that we create might be counterfeit or corrupted, and the ways that we miss the mark. So I got this idea to create a virtual exhibition of some kind based on the book of Exodus. I got my church involved and a few other people I knew that were artists of faith, and spoke with them about it, and then decided to invite people to participate in a show based on the theme of Exodus. And that was sort of open for people to interpret in the ways that they wanted to. In this next section, I ask a few of the artists that participated what their work is about, and I also ask about their experience with art in the church. Some of the interviews are really quick, some of them are a little bit longer. I'm so grateful to everyone that helped put this project together. Caleb did an amazing job with editing the first portion. My editing and equipment are pretty amateur, but I think you'll be able to still understand what people are saying and the ideas that are being expressed. Thank you so much to everybody that prayed. Thank you for the people that helped me get the call out. Thank you to my church for hosting the first virtual exhibition. And especially thank you to all of the artists that submitted work.
can't remember what I've called it, my initial title for that piece, but I ended up calling it Pharaoh's Daughter because I was contacted by a friend of mine who has a ministry where she is trying to educate people about the need for children, for all the parents who want to adopt. And so to try to show young women that are pregnant that there is another option besides abortion, that they can have their child adopted. And she had some friends, and they were putting together a book that was called Second Mother. And they did the book cover, and the book cover is they just did a spectacular job. They used the whole front and back of the book for the painting. So the entire cover is the painting. And
Very nice.
they did a beautiful job, I thought, because they used this purple on here. And when I did this painting, I was specifically working with color theory and trying to do the secondary triad with the orange, purple, and green as my colors. And I always think that helps when you focus on what your color scheme is going to be and stick with that. It just helps so much with unity and harmony in the painting. So I gave it to Jacob. They're doing another one of these conferences, but the conference is going to be called The Joyful Mother of Children. When he told me about the Joyful Mother of Children, I said, I think I have a painting I would like to give you. I sent it to him, and he sent back and he said, this is so meaningful to me because the mother of Moses is so important to the whole story. And I said, well, we could maybe do a conversation on that. And here's some notes of what I would be thinking about if we were going to talk about that. Sure. But one of the things that I wrote was, the feminine archetype is the mother who sacrifices her child to the flood of chaos and death. In other words, allows her child to go out into the world of trouble. Not even allows, but also nudges and pushes and prepares. We have the mother of Moses who put him out onto the flood, and we have the daughter of Pharaoh who received him from the flood, right? So if I release my child out onto the flood of trouble in the world, what is the world going to do with my child? And as a mother, you find out pretty quickly that when we release our children out into the world, we're still there. We are still needed to be there and be a support. That's right. You have no idea what the world is going to do with them. It's the same question. God says, what shall you do with my firstborn son when he releases his son out into this world? God certainly understands our grief and our struggles when we have to go through that whole process of releasing our children out into the chaos of the world. I think I was also thinking about the framework to initiate the work, so a boundary within which the work can unfold. Like if you limit your choice, for example, to orange, green, and purple, there are colors you're not going to get, but you are going to get a range of colors that are creating a harmonious whole, and that's also, I think, in this painting, creating that kind of sense of peace. Because, if I think about, she could either be Moses' mother, putting him out onto the waters, or she could be Pharaoh's daughter, receiving him from the waters. But because it's a peaceful location, it looks to me like it has to be Pharaoh's daughter receiving him, because when Moses' mother put him out onto the waters, the water had to be flowing pretty rapidly for the little basket to move out and get somewhere. But she's kind of in this little sheltered cove. But I have had people look at it both ways, which I think is another interesting thing about work, that you can do the work and you think you mean something by it, but other people find something entirely new and different in it. Yeah, so I think it comes down to, why do we paint the paintings that we paint? And I don't really have an answer for that. That was on my heart for some reason, and it's a matter of stumbling our way through the process.
I guess when I started reading Exodus, I wanted to jump right in and get to the good part. I wanted to do something like the burning bush, or, there's so many great scenes from this story, but I felt like I started to feel like the Israelites in the desert who were being constantly frustrated and stumbling around. And I guess this one came out of the idea, it really showed me how perilous beginnings are, and how much care is needed and how much help. And I was so struck by the line about the midwives who feared God more than they feared the Pharaoh. And I was thinking about like a little baby being sent off into the Nile, and just there's a crocodile in the image at the bottom, because it reminded me also of the image in Revelation of, I think, the woman clothed in the sun, and there's a dragon who comes to devour up the baby. And it's like every time something new is about to happen, it's so tricky. It's such it has to be so carefully tended to and given so much attention and grace to be able to go forward. And I guess that was, I had wanted to do something else, but that's not where it took me. So that was what I was really struck by in the end with Exodus.
And especially as a new mom and thinking about that, you must have had a connection to it that was different than maybe what you would have before you became a new mom.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it did sort of blossom up out of nowhere almost. I've never drawn a baby before. It didn't just came up out of nowhere. And I was also working on that the Lamentation of Mary, the Pietà image at the same time, and that idea of letting go of your child, or it's like letting go of everything, the future, everything, and just putting it in God's hands. So it was a lot to meditate on at once. But I think they had some overlap there.
I have a few thoughts on Exodus. As a believer in Christ, there's always a sense that God is calling us to keep moving forward. As we get to know Him better, He repeatedly calls us to push off from the familiar and move toward the new and unfamiliar. It can be a concrete moving from place to place, but in my case, it is a frequent relinquishing of certain mindsets and ways of viewing things. Moving on can initially be kind of scary and feel a bit lonely and empty. But as I set my eyes on a new point on the horizon and step out, I find reassurance, comfort, new hope, and a greater sense of God's presence in my life.
And this past year, I did the piece in a distance. I wanted to try to do something with ashes. I was working on a project with a friend where we were doing some poems and also some artwork. And I chose, because it was during Lent, I figured I would try to paint with ashes. I had never done that before. And so for me, I'm always trying new things with my art. I'm a new visual artist, and so everything is such a joyous challenge for me. I always feel like God is bringing me out of something into something new. It's something that keeps me humble, keeps me just striving to do better and to be better. That's what that piece reminds me of.
When you're painting, when you're working, do you find that there are new revelations that come to you about the subject matter that you're working on?
It's about the subject matter and life. Art has been the missing piece for me. I have been an artist my whole life. As one, I'm a singer, and so music has been my life. But when I discovered art, so I feel like I'm coming out of the wilderness. Like Moses, I feel like I have been called to be a voice in the work that I, really feel called to do is racial reconciliation work. And that part of my voice in terms of my art as it pertains to reconciliation, we have not gotten there yet. I'm still on that journey. Right now, for me, it's constantly capturing the beauty, but I have not been able to merge the beauty and that voice yet with my artwork. I do it with my singing. I feel that my work will have a justice push to it, but it's still coming.
Are you able to do it in your voice work because of the words, or because of the emotion that's generated, or something else altogether?
For me, with my voice, I paint pictures with my voice. I mean, I can tell the story. I feel like it was the beauty of art that has opened my eyes. My eyes have been open. The injustice that's in our world, my eyes is truly open to that. I feel like the beauty God has been using to keep my interest in the craft, developing the craft. My level of experience has not caught up yet with what I see. That's the only way I can explain it.
And it strikes me what you're saying about your eyes were open to something that you saw that required your attention, which is really so much of what we're doing in creating visual art as well, is our eyes need to be open.
Yes. I can't say that I didn't see it before, but I didn't see it at the level that I see now to even be able to put it on a canvas or to put it on paper. I could put it into words, I could put it into sound, into music. I could put that pain and my gospel artistry of music, but I want to be able to have that same truth and authenticity in the work that I do visually. Right now, it's still like, it's the beautiful things of life that I keep wanting to paint. And I marvel at how God did that. I mean, that was God. And I wonder how many people miss this wonderful gift and opportunity, because a lot of people don't view themselves like, if I would have told someone in 2017, I identified myself as an artist, a visual artist, how many people would miss that or have missed it because they think that that's not their thing. Like everything I do with art, I see God's hand in everything. You know, I find that He really does speak to me when I'm doing that.
So why do you think it's important for visual art to be a part of the church?
Oh, I think it's extremely important. I mean, come on, it's been part of the church from like way back. However, that got lost. Yes, it's contemporarily, it seems to be more difficult for art to be in the church. I'm fortunate in some ways in my church that the current pastor is open to that, and he actually shows images. We have these two big, huge TV screens on each side that he will show images. And I actually have a couple of my big pieces, 4 by 6 feet, up in one room. Where was I? I was out in California, and I went out there for an art conference. And they are very much involved with art as a means of worship, to assist in worship. And in fact, they even have studios on their campus, to help promote people involved in the arts. I think it's very important that art's in the church, but just simply putting it up.
So you think that would be something good to include then, are like opportunities where people could understand how the images are conveying something about the truth of God.
Yeah, most people, particularly when you look at the work from the earlier centuries, you know, those illustrated biblical stories, but I mean, you get abstract stuff or semi-abstract, like my work. I do not illustrate stories or concepts. I simply steep myself in scripture and pray that, you know, God lets those, whatever things come through my work, does come through my work. I see these forces expressed symbolically in the use of color and space. In the image of convergence, this hostility seems, you know, palpably evident. You got this huge area of intense, deep red up against this sort of in-between shape, and then this sort of peaceful blue. And it looks like it's just going to take over, but you don't know that. And this is what sort of gets to me, and I don't know how many people think about this, the death of innocence. For example, in Pulse, and part of the reason I call it Pulse is because it almost seems to represent a heartbeat. And you have this winding line over to the right, which could be suggestive of Nile River, or perhaps a strand of DNA. But again, you still got children who no longer have a pulse, and of course, parents whose hearts beat very differently now. And of course, in that one, there's also this expanse of barrenness, sort of suggesting the desert and reminding 40 years out there, and the many who just never would make it. Anybody just sort of looking at those without what I just said about those, I mean, they could think whatever they could think. Now, I've had people make many comments about them and respond to them well, but they don't attach them to many kind of biblical things.
But we don't know how the Spirit is at work, right?
You got it.
Some of the work might look a little sort of in a naive sort of category, folky kind of category, but I spent 7 years at art schools, and then it took another 7 years to sort of get rid of all the stuff that I'd been taught. And I moved to East Anglia, and that part of England has got an awful lot of medieval churches. They suffered from the Reformation, and that, you know, outside they're very, very impressive. You go inside, there isn't any decoration. It's completely clean. You know, it looks like a white cube gallery somewhere, you know, in New York City or something. And one friend said, well, if you know where to look, there's some really great stuff around. And he showed me the remnants of medieval art. But the things I saw really connected with me. I thought they were beautiful. And I had resisted doing religious art, not because I wanted to, but because every art school I went to sort of stopped me from doing it. You know, I did a crucifix with, you know, good thief and bad thief. 1 year, I mean, my degree, and the head of the art school came and was asked to talk to me. You know, he sat in my space and said, "But you know what? If that was turned upside down, you know, we wouldn't have to be burdened with the subject." But then when I done this tour with that friend of mine, I just thought, well, this is the work I really would love to do. So I felt encouraged, emboldened to engage with religious subject matter. And when I started doing that sort of work, there was a kind of, they were not sure. People were not sure about it. And my sister said, "You've got the wrong audience here." And she took the entire show I did. I took it down to the Hammersmith Irish Art Centre in London. And it was a great success. Then they created a catalogue for me. I sold 8 paintings on the first night. And really, I haven't looked back since that day, because a Benedictine abbey not far from the Hammersmith Art Centre saw the show and said, would you mind taking it down to our Abbey for a bit? And again, I sold 8 paintings on the first night. So they got it, and they got the humor in the work. There's quite a lot of humor in this. I just love the stories. I think they're very powerful. They've lasted as long as they are because they're good stories. And the other thing is that the history of art is really the history of religious art, isn't it? In a village close to where we live in Suffolk, there was the story of, he used to be the patron saint of England, which is St. Edmund. And he was martyred in this little village called Hoxton. So it was the next village to where we live. And every year they celebrate his martyrdom. And the local pub has a beer festival to commemorate his martyrdom. But I asked the landlord if he would allow me to put a painting of St. Edmund above the fireplace for the duration of the festival. And he said, yeah, that's a great idea. Go ahead and do it. Got a lot of feedback. And then a couple of years later, I got a phone call from the Friends of St. Edmundsbury Cathedral, who said, we've heard a lot about the painting. Would you mind bringing it up and showing the bishop? Which I did. And he purchased it on the spot after a bit of haggling. And now it rests in the Lady Chapel and has done for about 15 years. And that was the door that opened for the Anglican Church. They started to, they thought, well, if the Bishop of St. Edmundsbury Cathedral thinks it's okay, then maybe it is okay. And they started writing back. And then out of that one, on my website, there's another project to Edith Cavell, who was an English International Red Cross nurse. And that was a fantastic experience. And those paintings now hang in Norwich Cathedral. I came to America whilst this commission was going on. And because it was going to be a little time before we sent it to England, we approached Washington National Cathedral. And it just so happened that they were looking for something to mark the beginning of the First World War. And so we just dropped these paintings into their lap if they wanted to show them. It was about a woman, it's about peace, about witch. But all the embassies that were connected sent representatives. It was great. And after that one, I got permission to the spiritual life of the Reverend John Roberts, who devoted his life to the Native Americans, both instructing them in Christianity, but also helping them in their education, building schools, building churches, and helping them in treaties and things. But he was an extraordinarily charismatic man. I like to put some humor in it. I like to take liberties. I like to play games. A normal average gallery looks at your work. They say, "Oh, it's religious art. Oh, we can't take the risk." They won't do it. So I found, another element of humor and joy and pleasure into the work, and obviously it's very accessible to kids as well. There's a lot of reflective surfaces in my paintings which don't come across probably, and they're chocolate wrappers. The gold leaf would be used in the old days, and that's a kind of more of a solemn, and it shows that. But these paintings, they're made out of the detritus of life. I mean, with acrylic paint scraped over chocolate wrappers and all sorts of other stuff in it. And it's really interesting watching people who might think it very seriously and then walk up. But I love the way people feel like it's interesting how they know what's in it, despite them saying, I don't know anything about religion and I'm not interested. They kind of engage with it. So it brings all these different people together. There is that line, and I can't deny that it's true, that when you're really engaged with a painting, it is an act of prayer. When I get deeply inside it, there are messages that come into me that I didn't know were in there, and I feel like faith becomes more important to me, and it feels more central. The further I am inside the work of art and the story being told in faith, and then when you don't do it for a while, it kind of like I don't think faith is a constant thing that just exists there and nowhere else. It's an ebb and flow, isn't it? Music can do it. I mean, I find it is in the arts that I feel most.
So to me, the Exodus story it's kind of a microcosm of the big story, of the cosmic story. And I think that's the way with a lot of Bible stories, is they're a smaller version of the same patterns, a lot of the same patterns that show up on different scales.
Which is so fits in so much with your videos. And in your experience, has art been a part of your worship experience or spiritual experience, in either in the church that you go to or in your personal life?
The church that I go to tries to include art in that they always have artwork up, but I don't think the church, at least in my experience, really knows how to really bring it into the overall church service experience. But they're definitely trying to have artwork done by the congregation and other artwork in general. Yeah, so there's the question of how that integrates into the church service itself. But in terms of like worship and how my art interacts with my faith, I've always been very focused on like the story aspect. Even though I am a visual artist, there's always been something about stories, something about them that I've found very deep, and I've always had this sense that it can teach you about reality on many different levels. Yeah, so it's a pretty short animation, but I was really focusing on just one aspect of the book of Exodus, or one point in the book of Exodus, which is kind of the death and rebirth point, or like the baptismal point, I guess you could say, where they go down into the Red Sea and it's parted for them, which another thing that's interesting about this project is all these different baptismal points throughout the Bible. They're kind of different. Like sometimes, like I have Noah's Ark there, he's floating on top of the water, and then you have the Israelites kind of going through the water, but it's parted, and then you have Christ going down into the actual river, being baptized. It's all about this kind of death and rebirth, going down into the waters, which is kind of like chaos, and then coming back up as new or transformed in some way. Like I tried to bring it out of the biblical story. Like the main character of the piece obviously is not a biblical character, but he's going through a similar experience where he's, I guess, being flooded by water, and then at the end there's hope at the other side of that. I tend to be pretty intuitive when I work, so I don't always know the reasons why I choose things. Like the image of the wave coming over him, that's not something you specifically see in any of the biblical stories, but it is something that, I don't know, it just seemed to be in my mind to begin with. So that was kind of what I started with, seeing what's on the other side of that. I think that's about it.
Exodus means breaking through fear and believing in the God who made the miracle work and going forward out of it, being released from it, from the bondage, from the ego. My piece is about Exodus 14:31. When Israel saw the power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in their servant Moses. So it's about believing. It's about putting action to belief by doing. When you see the little footprints in front of the wave or on the shore, as they come up, they turn around and look back, and there's empty footprints there. There's evidence that they came through. They did it. They believed. They did it, and now the miracle has been released, and it's happening. And then the waves are coming crashing down and closing in on the Egyptians. They're in awe, and they're just saying, "We believe. It just increased our belief. We believe in God now." When I was making the painting, I've been a potter all my life, and my hands were always on the clay making the piece. And I was always explaining how God the Father is the one who forms us and what that relationship is on clay. But I found myself doing this painting. I've never painted before in my life, something that size. And I just was like, my hands were like, I was forming it. I was forming it, and it came alive. And all of a sudden, there it was. And I was amazed how God can use creativity and expression in anyone to reveal himself to us.
And how did it differ for you from the pottery? What?
It was a little less tactile, obviously, because you're not in there pushing the actual clay. But when I was taking the paint, I used a lot of palette strokes and things, and I was just feeling it. I just felt it. I don't know. I can't even explain it. I was just feeling it, and the swish up to the top there, and then how it comes over, and it's just waiting. It's hanging to come down on judgment upon the evil that was following them. It happened so quickly. I just did it. I was like, yes, that's it. That's what I wanted to express. That's what I wanted to create with this. Something I felt. So I guess you say, in relation to pottery, yeah, I feel when I'm doing the pottery. I feel when I'm centering and it's coming right there, and it's still, but it's spinning fast. I feel when I open it up and when I lift it and shape it and thin it down as my hands come up. And I was feeling this painting as I was doing it, I have to admit. I think as Christian artists, we need to think ahead and take seriously our work and our call, and truly keep it in prayer and before God to use, because He has used artists all throughout. Creativity is a gift, it's a challenge, it's a visual expression. It could be anything, a written word, a painting, a piece of music. It's learning to listen to God. And He's bringing me into this time now where I started this painting was something new I never had done, and also writing a book about all those concepts of being a potter and who He is as Father. And and they believed, and I believe.
So, well, it's interesting to think about your piece being, sort of from the back of the head and looking out over the landscape and the future. That's what it sort of makes me think about, like where is she looking, and where is her attention directed, and what is the idea behind where she's being led to go. Is that at all what your ideas were when you were creating it?
Yeah, there is a lot of looking. Sometimes I get way too absorbed with the details. I think a lot of us do, just what's very present right in front of you. And so the Lord's been challenging me to look out, kind of where He's leading me, and not get so bogged down by the immediate distractions, I guess. Things, just keep my eyes on what He has ahead for me,
Yeah, very cool. What do you think about art in the church? Has it always been a part of your spiritual life?
Even though historically it has been a very big part of, I think, spirituality, but growing up, it wasn't really a focus in the church where I was, or even later in my young adults. There wasn't any artwork. It was very stark. But I do think, being a very visual person, that the Lord has used art a lot to speak to me, because I could listen to anything forever and it won't stick, But if I see it, and especially imagery, that sticks in my mind. And I really think the Lord uses that to speak specifically to me, because that's how He's wired me.
I keep thinking about what's the difference between worship, which you are so amazing at participating in and presenting to the congregation, and that is so powerful, and that can be both a participatory thing or something that we watch. In the visual arts, it's very different, and it's hard to participate in it. I think that idea of, as people who really respond to imagery, that can be very powerful and moving.
Things that I think are really beautiful, specifically nature, any portrayal of the Lord's creation really does stir something in me. There's a reason, that's gonna touch somebody.
Well, I was thinking it was really interesting that your piece is connected to the Nativity, and I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
I started out with some little patterns. I think I knew that I wanted to do just a little bit of a landscape sketch, and bright red. It started to look a bit like a stable. I'd been thinking a lot about the bush, and thinking a lot about the stable, about what those symbolically represent. The burning bush has, of course, connection to Christ in the direct interaction with which Moses has with God through the burning bush. But I think it also has a very deep symbolic connection to Mary. It is burning but not consumed. That burning but not consumed has helped me, I think, in terms of being able to understand a concept which has always been difficult for me in Christianity and Christian morality, the idea of purity, which has always been one which I didn't really want to touch too much. It's a little bit tricky, a lot tricky. The idea of something which burns and purity associated with a bright burning flame helped me with that. I really value the image of the burning bush. The stable also, of course, Mary and the infant Christ are in the stable, but the stable itself is also connected to Mary in the sense that it's a container for God, for Christ.
There's a lot of things in your image too. I feel like the what looks like the burning bush, or that portion in the center, also kind of represents blood, which feels like purity as well, and feels very connected to the blood of the lamb that was over the doorpost. Then there are those portions of your image that have almost a feeling of a veil, and that also feels like it's connected to what's happening with the purification in the center. I feel like there's parts of it that make me think of manna and the process that God took the people through, as well as the mountain and the animals that are moving along the mountain and Moses' experience of being in that place. I thought it was a really interesting connection to put together the Nativity with also Exodus, and that connection to those things, something new being birthed, in this case, the law being birthed, and the opportunity for covenant with God that was so similar to what happens in the Nativity. So, and then even just the green, the new life in the green and the water and the rock, it looks to me like there is the potential for water coming from the rock, all these different ways that portions of this image could be interpreted. And what do you think about art in the church?
With it, I mean, it makes tons of sense to me. I didn't grow up in a church that was adorned with much art. It had stained glass windows, but they were all completely abstract, nice colors, but no images there. But I had very great experiences with the pastor and many others in the church encouraging art and having a deep love of art. That's deep in my family. My grandmother was an art teacher and a religion teacher.
So it sounds like there was a lot of support for that connection in your past.
Absolutely. And since then, I have moved further and further into churches and the church settings, which are more and more immersed in art and images. One of the ways that I understand my faith is that it provides an orientation. It provides a setting to live one's life in, and that comes through the seasons and the feasts and the fasts, and it comes through the remembrance of the saints. Art is one of the key ways to be aware of that setting, sometimes through images, through stained glass or through icons, other times just through the beauty of architecture.
Regarding Exodus, anything
Sure.
else?
Often what's on my mind is the wandering in the wilderness, sometimes the loneliness that comes in that, the sense of repetition, of going in circles. But your comments there included the bright points of that desert wandering, included manna and water from the rock. And so I was just very encouraged to hear you see those. So
I think it is super intriguing of this idea of the way the two events are connected. So it's exciting to see and hear you talk about it a little bit.
well, thank you very much.